This podcast was first released on January the 4th, 2021, to coincide with the airing at 2 p.m. on Radio 4 of a play by our special guest, Dan Rebellato. So do check out that play, You and Me, which is today, release day January the 4th, on BBC Radio 4, and available for a month thereafter on BBC Sounds. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Hadoke, try to guess what my special guests' favourite things about their chosen Doctor Who story are. Well, hello. I don't know about you, but I'm unwinding after a very long day in the company of a fabulous Doctor Who story. My special guest is the playwright Dan Rebellato, and this is what he sounds like.
Hi, Toby. I have chosen the Ribos operation.
So there's just an inkling of Dan, so that his is a familiar voice when he outlines the very clever thing he will doubtless choose to wax lyrical about, and with great insight. I've loved the way that different people have responded to this challenge. Some people have surprised me, and some I'm not surprised at how Dan has approached this. I thought he went into great detail with episode 1, so he's going to have really interesting things to say. So let's see what. First of all, you, lovely listener, who's come to my house at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if you want to go back and watch the video of part 1, or if you want to listen to my voice in part 1. My partner is asleep on the sofa because she's had a very long day and didn't want to, and wanted to be down here. But because of the way that my cameras and everything is set up, I've sort of got them all plugged into cables because they were running out of batteries. And during one point in part 1, she was moving in her sleep and her leg was sort of flying about, and I had to keep an eye out to make sure she didn't kick the camera tripod over or catch her leg in the cable. So, and I've decided to be professional and not refer to it at the time. But thinking about it now, I'm thinking I must have been looking with abject terror to make sure the camera wasn't being kicked over. Anyway, this is all part of it. I'm in a jolly mood this evening. I've been really buoyed by getting to grips with episode 1 of the Ribos operation. So now join me for episode 2 as we press play in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, and it's not a story, as Dan said in his introduction to part 1. It's not a story that a lot of people talk about, and yet, funnily enough, this was claimed very early on. Dan was one of the first people I approached to do this, and one of the first people to come right back at me, and he even put his own background in the video. If you're listening to the audio version of this, he was speaking from inside the TARDIS, because he'd gone to real effort with the video, which I do appreciate. But then somebody, I do like them. You don't see enough blood in Doctor Who. I know that's but I have there's a bloodthirsty child inside me. I mean, that's me. I haven't just eaten a bloodthirsty child or kidnapped one and kept it in my stomach. We haven't even mentioned Prentice Hancock. But somebody else. I asked somebody else to nominate a story, and the message came back saying, "Oh yeah, they'd really like to choose the Ribos operation." I was like, "It's already been chosen." And one, they were very surprised, and two, they were really annoyed because they wanted to be the ones that champion the Ribos operation. And there's something said about that, isn't there? There's something about, you know, it's obvious to eulogize the Caves of Androzani, and I love it, and I will. But that's easy. It doesn't feel quite so cool as going, but when we get to the androids of Tara, I'm loving that as well. I mean, I have to love all of them, but I will find it. I will feel I will. And it's something about, again, this identifying with the Doctor who doesn't follow the crowd or whatever. There's always something much more satisfying about liking a story that other people don't like, because you're sort of going, but that means I can discern things that the lesser mortals cannot. That's a nice hire. Did Spenton Foster's actually? We never really talk about George Spenton Foster as director. Did I say he worked on the Quatermass Experiment? He was a call boy, and then he worked on Out of the Unknown, so he had science fiction pedigree. Now, somebody should have made those two guards kneel in the same way, is my thought with that. The guards, Shreves. Dudley Simpson's doing a cracking job on this. I mean, presumably we're not supposed to, this isn't real music, but it does sort of blur the lines between what is ceremonial music that we're supposed to, that is there in the world, because it's big, isn't it? It's filling the room, it's filling the screen, but I love it. And is this Prentice Hancock's best performance in the show? I think he's saddled with two very tricky parts in Planet of Evil and Planet of the Daleks. He's actually very good in episode 2 of Spearhead from Space. He's very natural, because he does tend to play parts of people who are rather unnecessarily furious. You get the impression that his character's always just dashed off a letter to the council about the state of the pavements, and then has been called just as his coffee was at the right temperature, and he was just about to have a drink, and now somebody's come to ask him who his favourite Muppet is, and he's always a bit cross, but it's very useful in this, because he's actually a very solid sort of po-faced, and he's not yielding to the temptation to join in with everybody else, because that's not what the job of this character is. He's playing it straight. I like the way he stroked his moustache with his leather glove there, but he's complementing what Ian Cuthbertson is doing so gloriously, very well. I don't really go on forums much anymore, apart from to plug my wares or whatever. But I remember there was a thing on Outpost Gallifrey where somebody listed all the guest characters, I think, in Doctor Who, and just said best guest character, and you had to eliminate one. And people did them all for really arbitrary reasons, and it was just a random thing. But when there were about 11 left, there were people left like Astrid from Enemy of the World, who I think won it in the end. But of the last 11, I think Garen was the only one who was really a brilliant character. Because, as I say, it was a sort of silly thing that was done. There were no rules. It was a bit sort of Mornington Crescenty or whatever. And I remember the abject disappointment when somebody very innocently, who I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe they didn't know Ribos Operation, or maybe they were just playing this game with no rules in their own way, got rid of Garen, and the palpable sense of everybody else on the forum going, oh no, he was the one that was supposed, he's the only one left that's actually got anything about him. And I remember the person that limited, what? Oh, I didn't know, sorry. You could tell that everybody listening to it was going, well, so long as nobody deletes Garen, this whole thing we've been doing for months is going to be worth it. Because Ian Cuthbertson is really, really good, and very well known for being in Charlie Endell Esquire, in Budgie, and he's in The Stone Tape by Nigel Neal, great man of the theatre as well. I think he had something to do with the Royal Court, where Dan, I think, has done stuff. I like Shellac Scar as well. The relationship between these two is brilliant. The characters are really well drawn. He's got very wet lips, hasn't he, Paul Seed? It's because he's doing a lot of shouting. But it's good shouting. And Dan talked a lot in part 1 about what his story is, the fact that but the idea that the Doctor Who story is about a con, I think is nice. And now that we have things like Hustle and the the Ocean's 11. I know that's a remake, but that spawned a few others, didn't it? And sort of capers. Not many Doctor Who stories are capers. I know Time Heist was more recently, wasn't it? I think the caper is a genre that Doctor Who could do a little more, especially if it brings us into the orbit of characters like Garen and Unstoff, who are consistently through this story working against the Doctor, and yet you really like them. And that's a nice pull for the audience, because what you're sort of often you're thinking, how is the Doctor going to defeat this baddie, and I'll enjoy, watching the Doctor escape, the Doctor and the companion not die and escape. Whereas this, it's more like, well, we want them to outwit these con men, but we also like the con men. So how are we going to end this story satisfactorily with all of the people we like? Okay, seeing as those two outcomes seem at odds with each other. And all this backstory and the con and the fact that Garen is being as bold as brass, trying to outwit these. We're in no doubt that these are very, very dangerous people. I'm gonna run a great risk of doing what under normal circumstances I'm sure you'd love me to do, of being quiet, because I love listening to this dialogue. I love watching these performances. But and he's having such fun. I think he was conceived as an Australian character, which is why I think we still have the line about Sydney Harbour Bridge is that in the next episode? But the casting meant that that was slightly changed, although Ian Cuthbertson was Scottish. But the Hackney Wick stuff and all of that is great. Oh, and this is a great con. So they've gone in to this chamber and they have placed the Jethric, which is a dummy. Jethric, the scringe stone. So it's quite an elaborate con. So we've got Unstoff here. I haven't mentioned Nigel Plaskett either. I'm going to have time, aren't I? So don't. So we don't actually know yet that this is Unstoff, or do we? I don't. But that we do now, and he's having fun, and he plays this part of Unstoff, playing this part very well, and he does have a really innocent face. He was very well known for a nasal spray advert. Nigel Plaskett, playing a character called Malcolm. So one of those, you don't get that quite so much anymore, but an actor who's not a household name being known as that bloke from that advert, when of course there were only a very small number of channels, and adverts were seen much more widely. But this placing of him to tell this story, which he does so seemingly guilelessly, and of course the Jethric is it's the con, because it is actually worth a lot. They're pretending that they don't know it's worth anything, which means that the guys being conned think that they're conning the conners, which in terms of the morality, enables the con merchants to go, well, actually, come on, we're actually conning guys who were thinking they were conning us. So in a way, we can sort of get away with it. Whereas actually what it's worth is it's worth even more to the Doctor and Romana, because it turns out to be the segment of the key to time, which shows how ingeniously it's been brought in, and I like the fact. I think in lesser hands that would have been a knee to the leg, and Unstoff would have gone ooh, and it would have been an obvious. Instead, the quiet standing on the foot has the same effect, stop going over the top. You're overplaying your part. Let's have a bit of a comedy correction and a bit of physical pain deployed from the senior member of the partnership to the junior comedy klutz. All that's, par for the course. But I'm pleased that instead of it being an obvious, I love his Scringestone speech. That's a glorious moment. That certainly qualifies for for being my moment of the episode. But I'm sure it's not going to be the lone moment of beauty in this. Romana's coat is glorious as well, and because white is very dangerous. I mean, Mary Tam is one of those people you can imagine would wear white for the entire day and not get a blemish on it. I'm the sort of person that puts on a clean shirt and either scuffs it or a button falls off or I get bean juice on it within approximately 30 seconds, even if the nearest bean is on Mars. I'm a scruffy man, and I'm not happy about that. I have a brother who holds himself very well and can dress out of stuff that he's bought from a second-hand shop and make it look $1 million. You put me in a Versace suit, I would look like vicar who'd been rolled around in a yard and then put inside a vibrating car and then covered in brambles and sick. I have a very positive self-image. And I suppose I can understand why Doctor Who fans aren't massively turned on by this. It's an atypical story. It's a curious one for a season opener. It's a very charming fable that you could I think you'd have as a sort of mid-season jolly nowadays, where you've earned the right to have one of those because you've had planets exploding in episode 1 and fleet of Daleks in episode 12, and in the middle you can have a bit of something a bit lighter. This is it does that so well, because it's a comic performance, but the genuine danger lurking beneath all of this is palpable. It's very clear. So I'm not saying it's a frivolous story at all. The sense of danger is very well conveyed, but it's an undercurrent, and it's done through character. Actually, the cold acting in this is very good. I know that may sound like I'm damning it with faint praise, but I believe that it is cold here, and I know for a fact that it is not. And so, yes, the Graf is being bugged. So his suspicions have been aroused. So it becomes bluff and double bluff and cross and double cross in the best way that a crime caper should be. Gosh, she looks amazing. And I'm not just talking about physical attractiveness, although she is a very physically attractive woman. She is so elegant. And Doctor Who is a low budget show, and anything that can bring natural glamour is really, really helpful, because Doctor Who's not a very glamorous show. It's not the Avengers, which had big budgets and was all on film and had movie actors and all of that sort of thing going on. This is television centre in the 70s. Those are not necessarily glamorous things, and yet Mary Tam effortlessly just, I think, adds class and glamorousness. I love Nigel Plaskett. He's extremely likable. He's a puppeteer for Spitting Image. I'm assuming not the modern iteration of it. It's just been relaunched as I record this. But when Spitting Image was at its height in the 80s, Nigel Plaskett was was one of the puppeteers, and he's just launched a series on children's BBC where he's still part of that side of things. He's a vocal performer too, but and I think he's involved in production as well. I wrote it up, but these days information, unlike in the olden days when I would stuff seemed to stick limpet-like into the recesses of my brain where I could go, John Hamill was in this film and that film and the other. Nigel Plastick, I've written extensively about in my column for Doctor Who magazine about a new series that he's launched on children's BBC this year, and I know if it's not puppety, it's animated or something, and I actually wrote the words. I read the press release. I looked it up. Checked my story. Blah 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 blah. Can I remember the details now? Something that I committed to print 2 months ago. Nope. What's your name? Why am I cooking my shoes? That's how it happens. Look, it's glorious design work, and I love this. I don't know, anything that's sort of silent understanding between characters always has a weight for me, and when it's done well, it when faces and actions speak louder than words, I always find that quite compelling dramatically. There's some sort of subterfuge going on, and it gives it a weightiness. Did Robert Keegan run a donkey sanctuary? I think he might have done, but he was well known for Z-Cars and Softly Softly. He was Sergeant Blackett. So he was a very well-known face on television, Robert Keegan. But he's great here as Sherlock. I like the relationship. I like the fact that the subordinate is the older man. And so, although the Graf in Decay outranks Sherlock, he respects him, and Sherlock is the old soldier, who, yes, although as I say he is subordinate to the Graf. Actually, their relationship goes up and down depending on what each is bringing to the table. It's a good dynamic that I don't think I've explained brilliantly, but and I like the way the actors do it. I believe I believe these guys have a history. I certainly believe they respect each other. And credit to as I say, credit to Prentice Hancock, who was an actor, that people knew, and I think, on the back of better parts, to accept the role of captain. He doesn't even have a name. It's important having somebody no nonsense in that role, and I think he does it well. And I have said about Prentice Hancock, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing, and I've enjoyed the company of. But I sometimes when he's playing those sort of hot-headed characters, he does have that. He does have a strange ability to be both wooden and over the top at exactly the same time, and I think that is quite a skill, but it's an odd one. And it's bold, isn't it? Because this, but again, the wind and the snow, this works. I mean, yeah, it's studio bound, but I think the illusion is given and carried off. And yes, it's fake snow and it's not melting. And nowadays, I mean, there's a company that paints breath onto actors. I remember a friend of mine was in Band of Brothers, and I was surprised when he told me that a lot of the stuff that they did in the snow episodes was done in the studio. I couldn't believe it. And he said, there is a company, and I can't remember what they're called, but they're called something like Snow Breath or something like that. And their job is to go frame by frame to give actors cold breath in to sell the illusion of that. It's absolutely extraordinary that in such a small amount of time, how little different pockets in the industry crop up to tackle certain problems that we just, you just knew, well, they can't do that. So, we just have to accept that. And you did, as viewers. You colluded in television drama of this time. You knew that this was a suggestion of reality, and the reality maybe came from the performances, even if it's a heightened reality. And the artifice of the sets and that sort of thing passed for reality. You accepted that it was a suggestion, an evocation of what was real. And that's why I've always loved the acting in Doctor Who, because the people in it have to convince you of things that aren't true and are sometimes spectacularly untrue and are sometimes spectacularly silly and are sometimes spectacularly inconceivable. And it has to, and we have to think it's real. And now this is because Tom Baker, you can tell when he respects the person that he's acting opposite. He'll sometimes join in. He's sometimes a bit deferential. This is very good. Yeah, it's no one makes a fool of the Graf in Cairn lives. Oh, yes. I love this. I think it's absolutely terrific. But am I keen on that final close-up of the Doctor? I'm not sure, but that doesn't matter. There's a few of those where Tom sort of slightly nods and winks at the I remember the end of episode 1 of the Sunmakers. He kind of does that. Oh, really? It's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think a stronger producer might have gone, yeah, let's not do those things. But that's glorious. That's glorious. And Tom Baker and Ian Cuthbertson, I think, is a match made in heaven. June Hudson's doing a great job. Ken Ledsham too. It's good, isn't it? It's good, isn't it? So what am I gonna choose for that? I think. Come on, pause. Sorry, everybody. I just need to. Don't know why this is not pausing. Hang on. Sorry, my remote. I had technological problems, so I've just had to do a quick edit. Oh, I couldn't pause my disc, so I've had to take it out. So I might have had to do a quick edit there, but I've not been cheating. So let's have a look. So my thing for episode 2, before we cut to playwright Dan Rebellato to see what he has chosen for episode 2, I think it's got to be Unstoff's Scringe Stone tale, which I think is delightful, and it's a great synthesis of, Robert Holmes's world building, even though it's a false world that he's built, it is still rich and gorgeous. The performance of Nigel Plaskett doing it, I think the judgment of the whole scene is pretty spot on, and it's negotiated very carefully, and I think with a deftness and a lightness of touch, and I enjoy being in it. And I know, and it knows it's slightly silly, but I think I think that it knows that, and it's just like a warm blanket of cheerfulness and joy, and everybody sort of enjoying themselves, but not sometimes when everyone's having a good time, they forget to make sure you do too. You're absolutely joining in with that. You're having a cozy old jolly time in that scene with a lot of people working in a rather lovely fashion. So the Scringe Stone monologue by Unstoff. What's Dan chosen?
Episode 2. So I'm going to go much more specific here. The thing I love in episode 2, probably most of all, is the Scringe Stone scene in the strong room. And I love it. I accept it doesn't really make much sense. It's not clear at all what Unstoff is doing. Is he really, they've got a very worked out plan, and he seems to go completely off piste to try and get, a little bit of money for a fake map, which seems kind of weird. I also accept it's very odd that Unstoff and Garon are carrying around this piece of Jethric, which by all accounts, it makes anyone unbelievably wealthy. So why they need to do these con tricks, I don't know. But that aside, it's a fantastic scene. It's very, very funny. It's a brilliant interplay of all the main characters. You've got Garon and Unstoff, you've got Sholak and the Graf in Decay, and then you've got the Doctor and Romana. And it's kind of fantastic seeing the discomfiture of Garon as Unstoff starts talking, the sort of bemusement and suspicion of the Graf and Sholak, and then the fantastic moment where, and it really feels like it's Tom Baker doing this as much as the Doctor, where he sees the awkwardness going on and he thinks, that's fun, I'm going to go in and wind this up even further. And Tom Baker is just wonderful in that sequence, and he's joining in and chatting, and everyone is sort of bemused by his presence. It's a fantastic thing. It's very, as I say, it's very, very funny. I think it ends with that very funny line that I've thought about very often, that when they've been saying that Unstoff can't be a crook because he has such an honest, open face, and Tom Baker saying to Romana very sharply, but he wouldn't be a very successful crook with a dishonest face. Great line. Fantastic.
Yes. I chose the same thing as Dan. So it's 1-1. Oh, the stakes just got higher. Well, that's very exciting. I was intending to go to bed, but I'm having a joyous time on the planet Ribos. So I hope you can join me next time I am there, which for me, I think will be in mere moments. For you, because of the nature of scheduling of podcasts, you may have to wait a little while. Or not, depends if you save them up. And you know what they say, if you save them up, you'll never suffer from the scringes, no matter how cold it be. Ha 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 ha. So take care, avoid the scringes, and I will speak to you next time we reconvene on the planet Ribos. Take care. Thanks for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest was Dan Rebellato. This episode's featured patrons are Rob Leonard, Keith Say, Sebastian April, Mark Aldridge, and Anthony Carroll. You can join them by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke and signing up there. The music for this podcast is specially composed by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. Dan Rebellato's play You and Me is today, January the 4th, on BBC Radio 4 at 2 p.m. If today for you isn't January the 4th, well, you've got till February the 4th to catch up on BBC Sounds. And if it's beyond February the 4th, I'm sorry about that. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please rate and give 5 stars and review this positively wherever you can. That sort of stuff really does help. Thank you so much. More at my website, www.tobyhadoke.com.